So I'm going to start with this presentation for tonight. For this portion of it, the beginning portion, we'll do the FAA's presentation on aeronautical decision making. And then Nate also asked me to touch on some aspects of non-tower operations at airports. The big focus right now is on airports that normally would have a tower operating, but have had to go ATC 0 occasionally, remove all the air traffic controllers out of the facilities so that they can clean it because of a COVID exposure. This is happening quite a lot across the country. You may have gotten some emails from the FAA on this in the last couple of days and weeks, month or so. And in particular, the local airport that we have is Orange County. And so we're going to dive a little bit into that. I got a couple good Q&As from some people in the area. And that'll be kind of a little bit more of a discussion kind of thing. This first part's going to be a presentation mostly. And Jeff, I'll ask if you could keep an eye on that chat box, because when I'm doing this, I can't see the chat box. So I don't know if anybody's asking anything. And I'll leave it up to you as to whether you want to unmute somebody and have them ask a question, or if you want to ask the question or what have you. So
you got it.
With that, we'll take it away. So this is the, and I'm also trying my new wireless Bluetooth remote here to do the presentation. It's the first time I'm doing that. So we'll see if it works tonight. Here we are. So beginning exits for the building, take a look around, make sure you know where the exit door for your office or bedroom or hangar, wherever you're watching the movie is, the presentation. Restrooms down the hall and to the left. Unless you're in that other house, then it's to the right. It might be the second door. You're just going to have to figure that one out. You can always get the pod out from under the desk and use that, but make sure you turn your camera off if you're going to do that. Emergency evacuation. They actually, in this hotel, I get a little thing here. It's a ladder. It's going to get me down allegedly 9 floors of hotel back down to the ground floor. We'll see what that happens. So your house is going to be different. You do what you need to do to get out of your building if it catches on fire or an airplane crashes into it or something. Breaks, yeah, we'll take a break every 20 minutes for about 10 minutes. Oh, no, you can just take a break whenever you want. Cell phones muted, so we don't care. You can leave your cell phones on. You can make a phone call. You can take a phone call, whatever you want to do. And sponsor acknowledgement. Again, this talk tonight is presented by FAPA, the Fullerton Airport Pilot Association. If you're not a member, we would encourage you to become a member, but we do try to make all of our presentations free, even if you are a non-member. We hope that you find them of value, and if you do, then we would ask you to join us. And when we start meeting back in person again, like Jim mentioned, if you schedule your FAPA on a third Tuesday of every month, you can schedule your cardiologist visit for the third Wednesday and get your cholesterol level checked next day. Highly recommended. So today's subject is ADM, Aeronautical Decision Making. This is a Wings credit, a Wings Basic Knowledge 1 credit, half a credit for that. The Knowledge 1 activity is always something to do with decision making. And we find that this is an area that pilots struggle with quite often. So it's worth spending a few minutes to delve into it and think about how do we come to the decisions that we need to make on a regular basis and sometimes an irregular basis. And what tools do we have available? And how do we, if we think about this process a little bit, then it makes it a little bit easier to do it on a regular basis. So we'll talk a little bit about the history of ADM, some of the current and future technologies and methodologies coming up, and how to manage. Sometimes, especially in today's cockpit, we have just a deluge of information coming at us on a regular basis. So it helps to think about how to prioritize and manage that information so that you don't get overloaded and you can make sense of the madness. So in the beginning, yeah, believe it or not, Orville and Wilbur used some aeronautical decision making. The one that we typically think about is they tossed a coin to see who was going to go first. And that was arguably the first decision to make. I believe it was Orville who won that toss and got to take the first flight. It's been with us for 120 years. And we've just in the last, certainly in my career, I've been flying airlines now for about 35 years. We started to spend a little bit more time thinking about how do we actually do it. You know, in the old days, captain was God, thank you very much. And we would do whatever we needed to do, and we didn't pay attention enough to some of the other resources, in particular the rest of the crew. So we kind of formalized that process a little bit in a few different ways. And if we think about it some more, then we can exercise it some more. So one of the methods that the FAA talks about is that we call it the 3P model. And it starts with perceive. You need to perceive all the relevant information. So what's going on? You made a plan. Is the plan that you made still functioning? Is it still meeting the needs for your current environment? Has something new cropped up one way or another? Maybe you heard something on the radio, you saw something on your ADS-B, the engine starts running differently or whatever. Something has happened that may change the situation, and you need to take a moment and think about it. So make an effort to look around and listen around and get all the information you need to try to address this new situation or evolving situation. The next step is to process. So you're going to gather all this information, you're going to analyze it, and you're going to do a triage kind of process on it, where you determine, is this something I need to think about? Or is this extraneous chatter that really isn't germane to what's going on? And this is where it's possible to really get lost in the sea of information, especially today. You can get so much that you can't see what's important. And tell you what, this just happened to me last month. I was taxiing out of LAX going to Honolulu, and there's a whole sea of NOTAMs. I'm sure you've seen this before. When you've planned a flight, you pull up your NOTAMs, you look at your departure airport NOTAMs. I've got 3 pages of NOTAMs for LAX. Buried way down in the middle of one that says, is a NOTAM that says runway 25 right is closed. And in this whole sea of NOTAMs, I missed that one. Another piece of information I had was our takeoff plan, that our load plan, and our dispatcher, who's at our headquarters a few states away, looks at that and makes a plan for my takeoff. And he says, oh, we always take off on 25 right. So I'm going to give you a plan for 25 right. So that's the thing I see. And it's always normal. We always take off from 25 right at LAX. Almost never use any other runway. Sometimes 24 left, but almost never 25 left and almost never 24 right. So here was 2 chances we had to catch it, and I didn't catch it. So we're taxiing out for takeoff, and he says, okay, your takeoff runway is 25 left, because now I catch that 25 right is closed. So I was drowning in this sea of information and missed a pretty important piece along the way. Thankfully, I got a good crew, and we were able to figure it all out. We processed this new information that we had, and then we made a plan, adjusted the plan that we had a little bit for the new runway. There was a little bit of a tailwind, some other issues came up with that. So we processed this new information, put it into action, and we performed this new plan. So the new plan is we're going to use 25 left at this taxiway with this tailwind, this weight, and everything was good. So that was just a situation that happened to me about a month ago. And I'm sure you can think of other times when you've had this happen too. I remember doing an instrument proficiency check with a pilot out of Fullerton a couple of months ago, and we made a good plan to go and do the RNAV runway 20 right approach over at Orange County Airport. Great plan. Now we called the ATIS actually over at Orange County. We looked at the weather. They were landing on 20 right. So we made our plan. This is what we're going to do. We take off. We go talk to SoCal, and they say approach request. We say we'd like to do the RNAV 20 right. And they said, oh, unable, they're landing runway 02 left now. So as soon as we took off, this very complete plan, an excellent plan that was going to satisfy all the needs we needed to do today, went right out the window with essentially the first transmission from air traffic control. So you're constantly rechecking these and having to adjust your program with any kind of new information that comes along. And if you just think about this, okay, I got a new piece of data. What does it mean? Is this important? Do I need to look at this? And then adjust your plan and implement it and go on. And then now you've implemented this new plan, and it's time now to look at the information that you've already got, as well as any new information, and see if anything else has changed and you need to modify it again. So it's an iterative process that goes on from essentially the airplane down at the destination. And even then, you're still making decisions. Do you need to tie it down for the night, to fuel it before you tie it down, or not? These decisions continue for the whole flight. So the FAA has come up with a couple of tools here, and this is one I really like. My original intention was to switch over and demonstrate it, but I'm in this hotel in Korea that doesn't have very good Wi-Fi in the hotel, and I can't share my iPad screen tonight. So I've shown you this tool before, this flight risk assessment tool in some other talks. And if you haven't seen it, I really recommend, if you use an iOS device, an Apple device, go to the App Store. And if you just search for FRAT, you're going to see a picture with a logo that looks like the one over there on the right side of your screen. And if you download that app, it's a free app, and install it on your iPad, then this will help you maybe put a little bit of focus on some of the areas that we know cause problems during flight. And we're going to walk through this process just a little bit. They also have one available in the Google Play Store for Androids, and there's even a web version, I believe. You can download one for a Mac or a PC, and I'm going to show you where to get those in just a second. So the first thing with any sort of a tool like this that you implement, you can't think of everything. We thought of quite a lot of things, but we can't get everything. So you're still going to get kind of in the general ballpark, and then you'll have to make your own adjustments for your own situation, for your airplane, your avionics, your mission that you're doing that day. But this will get you in the area and get you headed in the right direction. So this is the beginning phases of a safety risk management program. And the way it does it, and here, let me start first with, here's where you go. If you go to the FAAsafety.gov website and you tap on that resources tab, let me see if I can make this work right there. Is that working okay, Jeff? You see the highlight?
Yeah, that's working.
I have to make sure I got the right screen here. Tap on that resources tab and then come down here to library, and it's going to take you to a page with that website over there. If you type that down, you can go directly to that website yourself. And you can also, as I understand it, you can take a picture of that QR code over there on your phone or your device. And if you've got a QR code scanner, that should take you right to the website to get this document or this tool. You can download this. Again, they've got a FRAT for the Mac or for Windows, and there's a document that goes along with it that kind of walks you through how the process works. So take a few minutes, sometime, before your next flight, or certainly before your next flight review, and download this and play with it a little bit, and just see how it works. And if you practice with it a little bit, eventually you'll get a little feel for what kinds of things that we know will indicate that you should put a little bit more effort, a little bit more thought into one aspect or another of your flight. So when you get this device, it's going to look a little bit like this over here on the right side of the screen. And you're going to see this color bar at the top, and this little airplane symbol on this sliding bar is going to start moving. And you're going to start with putting in the parameters for your flight. Is this a VFR flight or an IFR flight? You're going to define your own capabilities here. So as a pilot, do you have less than 40 hours in this aircraft? If you turn that on or off, you're going to see this little indicator is going to move around on the bar. If you have less than 40 hours in the aircraft, it's going to move higher because that's a higher risk time. If you've got more than 40 hours in the aircraft, it'll move down. And some of you, if you were here last April, I gave a talk on my transition into my new airplane at work. And one of the things I talked about is I start out on this new airplane that now I'm flying the 787 at work on overseas routes. Obviously, I'm here in Korea. And I mentioned that for the first few months that I'm on the airplane, I'm we call it a high minimums captain. This is when I'm new in the airplane. They understand that there's additional risks with this. And so we have higher minimums that I have to use for takeoff and landing. So even in the airlines, we take this amount of experience in your airplane into account, and we adjust our operation for it. So that's an aspect of it that maybe we should think about in our little airplanes too. If you put a new GPS navigator in your airplane, let's say, new autopilot even, you need to spend some time working with that equipment to get comfortable with it until or before you're ready to go out and shoot a 200.5 ILS approach, right down to minimums. So continue on down this list. Are you new to the avionics in the airplane? Have you been flying much? Those are the, sort of your pilot status in the airplane kind of switches. They probably won't change much but once. Now you've got some things that occur more on a tactical basis with each flight? So will this flight occur after work? If it is, then the assumption is that you've already put in an 8-hour shift in the office or whatever you do, and then you're going to go get in an airplane at the end of a long day. Maybe fatigue is going to start to become an issue. So maybe we want to just highlight that there's a higher risk involved with this operation now. If you've gotten some instruction in the last few days, if you turn that switch on, that's a good thing. That's going to lower your risk a little bit, because the assumption here is that you're working with somebody, you're improving your skills, perfecting your skills a little bit, and that's going to make you a better pilot, which, by the way, is one of the things that I like about the Wings program in general. Is the theory is you'll be flying with an instructor more often, and that will make you a safer pilot. So you go on down this list and you highlight, select these items here. You completed a wings phase. And if it's an instrument flight, if you indicate up here that it's an IFR flight and you come down here, this last switch is going to already be on. When you tell it it's an IFR flight, it's going to say, we're assuming that you are instrument current and proficient, that you're capable and legal to operate this flight. So it's not even going to give you the option to turn this one on. It's already going to be on. But if you're a VFR pilot and you are instrument current and proficient, then that's also a good thing. That will mitigate a little bit of risk, and that'll move our risk bar down just a little bit. So that's kind of the idea. And it goes through the 4 main focus areas, starting with the pilot. It's going to move on to the airplane. It's going to get into the environment, the weather, the conditions of the flight. Is it in mountainous terrain? Is it going to be at night? Is there weather? Is there weather reporting at the airport? That sort of thing, and so on. And then it's going to come up with a number at the end. And let's see, are we going to, oh, he doesn't show that. And this is where I really wanted to be able to demonstrate this. As you're turning these switches on and off, this bar up here is going to slide, this little indicator is going to slide across to the right. Eventually, you see up here, our lights are all green. Those lights are going to go to yellow and then red and then start flashing if you get a really big number. And you'll also get this little button down at the bottom right here. It says 12. You'll see that number creeping up and up with every button that you switch. So if you start to get up there to where you've got a flashing red light, that means you've got a lot of risk factors that are impacting this flight. And maybe you need to think about, is there a way to mitigate some of these? So for instance, maybe you decide you're flashing red. You think, well, maybe I better not go after work. I'll just put this flight off, and instead of leaving tonight after work, I'll leave tomorrow morning when I'm fresh and well rested. It'll be daylight. Maybe the weather will be better. You can mitigate all these risk factors until you get to a number that you're comfortable with. Hopefully it's something green. It might be something even yellow. And then it also has the capability down here at the bottom. You can email that to somebody. So there are some corporate and charter flight departments that will take that. They require each pilot to create one of these assessments for each flight, and they email it into the dispatcher. And then that way they have a record that you have at least contemplated these issues and mitigated to the extent that you can. We got an open mic there, Jeff, or a question coming in? So that's that FRAT device. I recommend you go get it and play with it a little bit. If you're having a hard time finding it or working with it, then fling me an email and I'll help you out when I get home. But this whole idea of decision-making and crew resource management kind of works together to improve our safety. And we've got a history that started back in the 70s with a couple of very signature accidents that were caused by poor examples of resource management or decision-making. And that's why we started to put some spotlights on these issues. And one in particular was the Tenerife accident, the mid-ground collision of two 747, still the deadliest accident in aviation. That was a poor decision. The information wasn't flowing, it wasn't being interpreted, it wasn't being appreciated to the extent it needed to be. In the old days, the captain was the captain. The captain made the call and the crew executed a call. There were no questions asked. There was no debate. That was the way it was. And so we've now migrated into a situation where it's a team effort, and by our policy manual, our procedures that are required for us to operate our airplanes at work, I am required to accept input from anybody who has input. And so that might come from my fellow crew members in the cockpit. It might come from a flight attendant. It might come from another aircraft or from ATC. I have to take all this stuff into consideration and contemplate it. And anytime I'm about to take a decision, I'll voice that decision. I'll say, hey, here's what I'm thinking about. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And the 3 or 4 of us in my airplane, I'll have to come to an agreement on this. And if they don't, then I set the brakes and we stop for a minute. We hash it out. We figure out, how do we fix this, or can we fix it? Do we need to go back to the gate? And so we've implemented all this technology, this thought process a little bit more directly. Let's see. So we had all these external resources. We had air traffic control coming at us in our ears. We have company dispatch. We have other aircraft talking to us. This can be kind of confusing when you get a lot of stuff going on, and I still have to decide what's important. Who do I need to focus on right now? But the resources available to me at work in facilities like this, with people in a nice comfortable chair in an air-conditioned room with tremendous resources available. These are people who are constantly keeping their eyes on everything. They can see way more than I can see. So, I'm just the pointy end of the spear, and I don't know what's going on out there. But these guys are keeping an eye on everything, and I can lean on them and say, hey, what's going on? They feed it to me, and now I can make a better decision. In the GA world, we have to be a little bit more proactive with this because, and this is part of what I found that I was missing when I got out of GA. In GA, I am the chief cook and bottle washer. I'm the maintenance supervisor. I'm the load planner. I'm the catering manager. I'm everybody. And you are too when you fly your airplane. So take a moment and think about this. What tools do you have available to get more information? And, maybe the easiest example is weather. At work, I've got an army of meteorologists working for me. I've got a dispatcher monitoring other flights and getting information from those other pilots. In your GA world, we've got tremendous information available now that we didn't have just 10 years ago. Think about onboard weather radar, for instance. Now we've got ADS-B or XM radar that we never had before. That's more data coming at us. So what are the limitations of that data? I've talked before in many occasions about this weather data that comes to us through ADS-B or XM. It's slow. It takes as much as 20 minutes to gather and assemble that data and get it to us. So it's not necessarily bad. It's just not timely. So you need to know how this resource works and what you can use it for, and more importantly, what you cannot use it for. So know the limitations of the data you're gathering. What does it really mean to me? And it's a little bit more incumbent upon us as GA pilots to take more charge of that information and check it ourselves. And that the final point on the bullet here is pilot reports. Get reports from other pilots. We have kind of an automated process at work, but in the GA world, we depend on each other. So even if you're flying, say, across the Rockies and you had a beautiful day, there's calm winds, clear skies, smooth ride, smooth as silk, it's all good. Let other pilots know that. So the next guy coming through an hour behind me might want to know that. And I might want to know that the guy ahead of me had a nice smooth flight. That's going to make me feel a little bit more confident in the plan that I've got. So please make more pilot reports. And this is more than just telling air traffic control you've got a smooth ride. If you tell the ATC guy that you've got a smooth ride, he's just going to say, oh, great, and move on. But he's not going to enter that report into the system, so the next pilot won't have access to it. So you might have to go offline and get on your second radio and make a call to flight service to issue this report. So all sorts of resources inside the airplane. There's a lot of discussion going on in the GA world about flight management systems and aircraft automation. Should you install an autopilot? And Jeff, I'm going to start lobbying for an autopilot in our airplane. I think it's about time. The whole idea of an autopilot, though, and here's the debate, is if you put an autopilot in and now you just fly with the autopilot all the time, you're hand flying skills are going to degrade and you're going to become autopilot dependent. Well, that is a real risk. But think about this. Who can fly the airplane better? You flying it by hand or putting it on autopilot? So I look at it as delegating a task to either another pilot. Hey, you fly the airplane, or the autopilot, you fly the airplane. That can take care of flying the airplane. Now you, as the PIC, can take a little step back and get a little bit of a bigger picture about what's going on. I don't know if you've ever noticed sitting in your airplane that I find the closer I am to the instrument panel, the less I see. And so the left seater flying the airplane doesn't see anything. The safety pilot over in the right seat can see a little bit more, or the flight instructor over in the right seat can see a little bit more. Passengers in the back seat can see way more than that. And the NTSB outside the airplane trying to figure out the accident can see everything. So the closer you are, the harder it is to see stuff. So the more that you can delegate to either another pilot or a piece of equipment, the easier it is for you as the PIC to interpret and analyze and do this perceive, process, perform iterative process. So, and one of the things we debate at work with these autopilots is, should you hand fly? Should you let the autopilot fly? And we talk about the tons of debate in the industry on this. And what I come down to is the autopilot saving you work, or is it making you work? And if it's making you work, and by that I mean you're having to spend a lot of time trying to think about, what's the autopilot doing now? Why isn't it doing what I want it to do? How do I make it do what I want it to do? And if you're having that discussion, any element of that discussion, then the fact is that the autopilot is making more work for you and you should turn it off. But if you can turn the autopilot on and put it in a mode that you want it, verify that it's doing what you're telling it to do, and do that with confidence, and you can take a moment to do that, set that process up. Now you can take a step back and relax and let the autopilot do the work for you. So general aviation, single pilot operations, you got tons of opportunities here to implement some of these risk management processes. And realize that a lot of these resources that you will need to gain access to and to use over the course of a flight might not be in the airplane with you. So be willing to call flight service or air traffic control or Unicom even, and get the information that you need. A phone call to flight service on your way to the airport can help. A lot of us now are doing our briefings by ForeFlight or whatever app you choose, and that's fine. But you need to practice getting that information. It's one thing to click that brief button and download that briefing, but you really do need to take a few moments and read it and find those runway closed NOTAMs that are buried in the other mountain of NOTAMs. So I've made a note to myself, I'm going to get better at that in the future. But that call to flight service, this is another guy on the ground in the right side of the screen here. Generally, this person is look at all those screens. Look at all that information that guy has. And here you are at home briefing your own flight. You've got your iPad, maybe a screen over here. It's a whole difference of information. And you're having to find that needle in the haystack. This guy is looking at all these needles in all these haystacks at the same time. And he knows what all this stuff is and can put a more experienced generalist kind of view on it. So yeah, think about that. How about passengers? It's funny down here in the note on this one, John mentions, well, so think about how to use your passengers. Just like the autopilot, a passenger can be an assistant or can be an obstruction in the cockpit. So think about which is which and how do you turn them more into an assistant than a detriment to you. And the first part of that is you have to set their expectations, give them a good pre-flight briefing. Besides telling them how the seatbelts work and the doors and all that kind of stuff, I always introduce, okay, here's my tail number. I'm in the 735 Charlie Yankee. If you hear that in your headset, that means somebody's trying to talk to me and I need to have their attention for a moment. So just halt the conversation for a minute and I'll come back to you. So you got the regular safety items you need to talk about. And we also need to talk about sterile cockpit. What does that mean to you? And passengers don't always appreciate this. In the airlines, what this means, it doesn't mean no conversation at all. It means no extraneous conversations. So if you're flying along, you're approaching an airport for landing, and if you've told your passenger, okay, I'm landing the airplane, I need to concentrate on this, no conversation at all. And if that's what they're going to do and not say anything, they might see the other airplane that's approaching from the other side that you don't see. And you might want to know that. So you need to let your passengers know it's okay to tell you if there's something like this that might impact the flight. In the notes here, John puts a comment about, we know of one pilot who pays his kids $1 for each target they spot before he does. That's me. I told John that story. I did that with my daughter. And I was paying her $1 per airplane. And we did one flight one time. I owed her $20, I think. My wife said, I think that's too much. We need to make that 25 cents instead of $1. And I just said, hey, $25 is a lot cheaper than a midair collision. So I want to know about these airplanes. And I made my daughter a part of the crew, basically. Gave her a job to do. And when she saw some real payback in her wallet, in her piggy bank, she was real happy to spot for airplanes. And she did that all the time. It was great. And now she's back in Buffalo again, so you don't get to fly them anymore. You can have them be your chart holder, your paper shuffler, your checklist reader. Even it was funny, he put zookeeper in here. I was hoping, I can't find the picture. I was going to throw a picture in there of my daughter with one of the guide dog puppies that we raised in the airplane. I thought John was joking when he put zookeeper in there, but if you're carrying animals, maybe you fly pilots and paws or something like that. It's good to bring somebody who can wrangle the menagerie for you in the back seat so that doesn't become a distraction. So these in-flight resources might consist of all this glass cockpit stuff. Again, you've got a tremendous amount of information that's just coming at you full speed with these gorgeous, colorful, sexy, alluring screens. But the one screen that's most important is that one. You should be looking outside the window a lot more. And one of the problems we have with this is that, especially as people now are installing some more of these screens in aftermarket STC type things, there's a learning process that's going on, and pilots are spending a lot of head down time looking at the screen. They're not able to look outside. So if this is you, then make sure you get some instruction from somebody who knows how the equipment operates. Maybe carry somebody along in the back seat who can do a traffic watch and not be distracted by the screens. So these are a real problem. And yeah, you might see the little bitty yellow airplane on the traffic display over here on the main display, but the one you really care about is the one that's just outside the window. So don't forget about that one. Weather resources, whether it's on a portable device like this Era here, or if it's on a mounted and installed piece of hardware like this, again, know the limitations of it. Know what information is telling you. If you can, even do a little bit of research on where that information is coming from and what does it mean. And you'll be a lot better off. You don't tend to spend so much time thinking about the data and more about using it. How about tablet apps? Oh boy, are we swimming in tablet apps? They're great. I teach a lot of for-flight classes. You can't possibly know all of the things that it can do. Every time I think I'm getting up to close to 100% of fluency with for-flight, they come out with another version and introduce a bunch more stuff. So now I've got to learn some new features. I just learned another new feature last week. But practice with these things on the ground, maybe with the flight simulator at home, maybe in your airplane while it's parked. Practice with these things on the ground, knowing where to go to get the data and how to interpret that data before you get in flight with it, because it's just an extra distraction in the airplane and you don't need that. One of the other things I'll point out, I've been mentioning this for a long time, the lion's share of the pilot deviations that the FAA investigates are airspace busts, especially in the LA area. Almost 70%, I'm told, of the pilot deviations are airspace busts. And what people are doing is, oops, hit the wrong button there. They're flying right around this airspace and tucking right up next to the border of a piece of airspace. And instead of giving it a nice, respectful arm's length distance to it. And the problem is, yeah, your GPS is very, very accurate. It knows exactly where you are, sometimes within just a few feet. But the problem is that it's air traffic control radar that's driving this show. And the radar trumps your ADS-B. Radar accuracy depends on how far away you are from the antenna and how that whole system is working in that particular location at that altitude that day. And so your position might not be known to an accuracy of more than about 2 miles in some cases. So if you're snugging right up and your iPad is indicating that you're 50 feet outside that airspace, but the air traffic control is showing you 1.5 miles inside the airspace, and guess what? As far as they're concerned, you're 1.5 miles inside that airspace. So give yourself a good boundary outside. What I recommend is look at the VFR chart and look for a signpost. For instance, in the LA area, north side of the Bravo there, I want to be, this freeway is outside the airspace. I want to be on the north side of that freeway. Now I've got a visual confirmation that I am outside that airspace. So give yourself plenty of room, and no amount of saving your track and submitting that as evidence afterwards is going to work. As far as the ATC system is concerned and the FAA enforcement process is concerned, if their radar shows you inside that airspace, you're inside that airspace. So again, Autopilot Systems, make sure that you have, if you have an autopilot, that you know how it works. One of the things I see a lot of pilots forgetting to do if they have an autopilot installed is to do the before takeoff check. If you look at the checklist for some autopilots, some of these things have as many as a 45-step pre-flight checklist that has to be performed on every flight you're anticipating using this autopilot. You got to check your disconnect buttons. You got to check your roll mode, check the heading indicator, check the GPS, all these checks you have to do. And if you're not doing those checks, then technically you're not legal to be using that autopilot for this flight. So make sure you know your equipment. And one of the most important things I like to point out is, how do you turn it off? I've heard of cases where the disconnect button didn't work to disconnect the autopilot. So now what do you do? And in some cases, you might have, power switch on the front panel of the autopilot. You might have another autopilot switch on the panel. You've got the disengage switch on the yoke. Maybe you have to pull the circuit breaker, or in an extreme case, maybe you have to turn off the avionics master switch, or even the whole airplane master switch to get it disconnected. It's a possible failure mode, and admittedly, they're very rare, but you should know all the ways there are to disconnect your autopilot. And again, practice using it in all modes. Make sure you know how these things all work. Getting it in and out of a mode. I like to instruct on it the same way I like to do with the GPS. Before you hit a button on it, you should know what that autopilot is going to do, so that when you push it, now you can just do a quick check and make sure, okay, is it doing what I told it to do? And if it is, then good, you can move on to the next thing. If it's not, then you need to go back and fix it, figure out what you did wrong, and get it working the right way. So you get one of these fancy schmancy fire-breathing autopilots installed. Don't forget to hand fly the airplane every now and again. And if you're an instrument pilot, if you've ever had an instrument proficiency check, you know that if you have an autopilot installed, you're required to use it on at least one of the approaches. And conversely, you're also required to hand fly one of the non-precision approaches. So you need to know how to use it. You also need to know how not to use it, how and when not to use it. So practice flying both ways, but if you've got that tool, use it. So there's a bunch of great books the FAA puts out on all this stuff. There's an Aviation Risk Management Handbook. There's this article from Flight Training Magazine that John points out. That's kind of an old one now. It's still a good one though. Oops, sorry, hit the wrong button again. This one up here, the Risk Management Handbook, that is downloadable for free in ForeFlight. It's also available free online. You don't need to pay for these books. All these FAA publications are available for free online. In most cases in ForeFlight and some other tools, you can put it right in there. And that's handy because you can search it. You can put bookmarks in it. You can put annotations in it. And it's a very handy tool. So that is the end of the official presentations. We got any questions coming up, Jeff? If you have a question,
I don't see any in chat, but if anybody
Do we
has a
have any
question,
chat with in
it
my
looks like Santosh has a question. You can go ahead and unmute and ask a question.
When you're required to take input from flight attendants and other aircraft, air traffic controllers, etc., what about other passengers?
Yeah, I get questions from passengers all the time. On the 737, we got them routinely. There was a little maintenance thing that they would have to do sometimes on the inboard flaps. There'd be a little notch cut out of the inside of that flap. So there'd be a piece of the flap missing. The key was it's a perfect round section that's removed. It happened to be right behind the engine exhaust. We called it the shark bite. The shark came up and bit the trailing edge of the wing and cut this thing off. Passengers would complain about that all the time. And I've gotten a lot of comments about, oh, there's a hydraulic leak on the wing, or there's a screw loose or something. So yeah, I'd take input from anywhere I can.
If they require you to do it, I'm booking a
bias it
flight.
with experience level. You know, if I have a passenger who's freaking out about something, I put a little bit less credence in that than if a crew member sitting in the back told me something. I can take that to the bank.
If they require you to do it as a low-time 787 pilot, I'm booking a flight on your next flight.
You know, the funny thing is I've flown this thing now. I just finished my consolidation period. So now I've got 120 or so hours in the airplane. And I've carried a total of about 300 passengers. I've flown 2 passenger legs, one to Honolulu and one back. That's it. All the rest of them have been cargo flights. So
Any vaccines?
I don't know. I haven't flown them yet. I've flown a lot of medical equipment. I'm here in Korea tonight. In about 4 hours, I'm going to go fly over to Beijing and back home. Last time I flew to Beijing, we picked up 60,000 pounds of cargo, and a lot of that was medical equipment. So a lot of masks and COVID test kits. I know I've seen that. So there's a ton of stuff coming around, and that's why we're doing it. That's why I'm in Tier 1B for the vaccination as an essential worker in transportation. So hopefully I get my vaccination soon. Well, if that's all we got for question, then come on. All right. Y'all know how to get a hold of me. Send me an email. It was in the announcement that you got from FAA. I can't see the chat box right now during the presentation, but Jeff can.
Yep,
He'll save it. And any questions or contacts you have, just fire it off on me.
Yeah, we actually did get a question in chat. Is there any simulators that you recommend? I have a PC trainer from Garmin 1000, a GTN 750, G430, which is helpful for IFR currency and scan techniques. So I know definitely some of the navigators do have good PC simulators that help with procedures, but I'm going to add to that, Mike.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I did a webinar last month with Brian Schiff on the Garmin GNS, and for that entire webinar, I used the Garmin simulator, and it's a great tool for learning this stuff. That particular simulator is not that great. It's very old now. It hasn't been updated in 12 years or something. The simulators available for the GTN and the Avidyne IFD series are excellent. And it's really worth downloading those, getting those tools, and spending a fair amount of time with them. Just walk yourself through a practice flight and go through the steps that you need to go through to do whatever it is to intercept a final approach on an approach, or to set up a visual approach, or go direct to a fix, or whatever it is. Practice this on the ground with a simulator, ideally under the watchful eye of an experienced CFI who knows that equipment, can guide you a little bit. I've done Zoom webinars with pilots did one on the GTN one time, did another one on a GNS navigator. We did ground time with these simulators over Zoom. And I recorded them, and I know the one case with the GTN 750, he recorded this, played it back on his phone. He went out to the airplane and replayed it sitting in front of his navigator in the airplane. And it was a great tool to develop the skill that we worked on. So yeah, I highly recommend them. For working with ForeFlight, I use Microsoft Flight Simulator. You can also use X-Plane. Will interface with your iPad with ForeFlight on it. And that's a great way to practice in-flight techniques. When I teach a ForeFlight class in person, I'll bring along a flight simulator, and I can have the entire class connected to the simulator just like we're all in the airplane. and the whole class can fly the flight together. It's a great tool to do that. I highly recommend it. So fly with your CFI quite often. You know, don't be a stranger. We feel lonely if we only get a call every 2 years. So give us a buzz more often and fly with us. Practice on your own, but you know, it was Vince Lombardi who said, practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So if you're practicing something incorrectly, a poor technique or a wrong technique, even worse, if you practice that wrong technique, that's what's going to get embedded. And so it's important that you have perfect practice by doing proper techniques along the way. And document in Wings. Use the Wings program. Those of you I've flown with know that I do this exclusively for flight reviews. I think it's a good program. It has a lot of potential for GA pilots to enhance your own safety by flying more. And the stats are coming out. If you use the Wings program, you're a better pilot. You have less accidents. So thanks for coming. That is the main part of the presentation for tonight.